The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Sometimes with so much focus on airplane terrorism and mass shootings, not much attention is paid to other areas of vulnerability when it comes to terrorism or crime. And one of these that we've talked about on our show for a while is trains and bus stations, which even in large cities often have absolutely no security. And another is the sort of relative ease with which once acquired chemical weapons could be used to really do damage to the water supply or to large populated areas through the air. And we have news regarding ISIS and chemical weapons. According to Iraqi and U.S. intelligence officials, ISIS is aggressively pursuing development of chemical weapons, setting up a branch dedicated to researching and conducting experiments with help of scientists from Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere in the region. And that being said, U.S. intelligence officials don't believe that ISIS has the capability to develop very sophisticated chemical weapons, like, for example, nerve gas, which would be the most suited for a terrorist attack on a civilian target. But we do know that ISIS has used mustard gas on the battlefields in Iraq and Syria. And this discussion about chemical weapons and ISIS isn't really about sowing irrational fear or about scaring people, but about being honest that I think about this, Lewis. I think about the security of trains and the possibility of someone getting into Manhattan or Boston or crowded cities and releasing some kind of toxin into, for example, the water supply or Grand Central Station or the train and bus terminal here in Boston. That is something I think about. And we now have some intelligence information, at least, that ISIS is working on this type of technology.
Yeah, and they are operating in Syria, right? And we know Assad has used chemical weapons on his people.
Sure.
And so, it may not be that difficult if they take over a certain area to, they may be able to get their hands on some. And you're right. I do think about it domestically too. Not pleasant to think about.
It is much easier to move around with dangerous chemical elements than it is with guns and explosives. That doesn't mean that we know that, at least in New York City, bridges and tunnels, we believe they have methods of identifying when certain chemicals are passed through, but certainly compared to high explosives and metal weapons, we're talking about something different here. As battlefield weapons, chemical weapons are not considered particularly effective, but as tools for terror, I fear they can be quite effective. And I really hope that the right people are keeping an eye on the export of biotech manufacturing equipment. There aren't an unlimited number of companies that make either the equipment or deal in the chemicals that would-be chemical weapons terrorists would want to get access to. At the same time, using I want to talk about this because I think it's a real thing. At the same time, the fear of nuclear or chemical weapons has been used in the past to create a pretext for military action. So we want to also be cautious of that.
But his, the chemical biological weapon thing, domestically, I don't think there's an excuse for military action. I mean, what we need is better security, better intelligence, and just we need those researching it or developing it to be more responsible with it.
There's been another shooting at another big box retail store. Remember, the good woman with a gun who shot up a Home Depot a few months ago. This was a 47-year-old woman with a gun who shot at a suspected shoplifter at a Home Depot in Auburn Hills, Michigan. Police said that they saw the woman basically see someone leaving after presumably being thought of as a shoplifter and starting to haphazardly fire in their direction. She was ultimately charged in Auburn Hills, Michigan. We now go from Michigan to Texas, where police in Belmead, Texas, are looking for another woman who shot at an unarmed would-be purse snatcher in none other than a Walmart parking lot. Other bystanders were pursuing the man. According to KWTX, the man snatched the purse of an elderly woman as she and a companion were unloading groceries in the parking lot. Between 4 and 5 men tackled the thief, pinned him to the ground. However, he was able to break loose, at which point a woman who was standing by and pointing a gun at both the thief and the pursuers as they wrestled with him took a shot as the suspected thief started to leave. the man was not hit. He did stumble after hearing the shot and was once again tackled and captured. Now, the woman can be seen in video that has been released, which we will not be playing because it's from a local news station, and they really like to make life difficult for shows like ours who use their clips, but you can find it online. The woman can be seen calmly just walking away, holding the gun in her hand before reportedly just getting into her truck and driving away prior to the police arriving. Police are looking for this woman. Police have not tracked down the woman. The suspect they have, the woman has not been tracked down. And any information that people can provide, the police are very interested in hearing. This is a perfect example of why the more guns in more places crowd is sort of living in a fantasy world of how you can just stop the bad person with or without a gun, whether or not the bad person has a gun. In this case, they didn't. How you can just use a gun to stop them. By sheer luck, Lewis, nobody was hurt as a result of this woman shooting, including innocent bystanders. And what effectively ended up being a warning shot, right? I mean, a shot that startled the suspect but did not actually hit him, made him stumble and fall, and then he was caught. This is just horrifying, right? You go to Home Depot and shots are fired in the parking lot. You go to Walmart and you've got shots fired in the parking lot. This is way too common. Shots in the parking lots of big box retailers.
It's a nightmare situation. I mean, the second she pulled that gun out, she was more deserving of getting tackled, or equally deserving of getting tackled than, as the shoplifter or the purse snatcher was, Dave. You just have idiots everywhere, and idiots with guns is not a good thing.
No, it's incredibly scary, and time after time, and we spoke to Lad Everett about this from the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence just a few weeks ago, that the good guy or good gal with a gun scenarios are typically fantasy land scenarios that don't translate into more safety in the real world, particularly here, a crime, a purse snatching, an unarmed purse snatching of an elderly woman, absolutely horrible. But when you've got 4 or 5 people wrestling with the suspected perpetrator, I don't know how introducing a gun and firing that gun in a crowded parking lot is going to increase the chances of what we would call a good outcome in this particular case.
Yeah, and from reports pointing that loaded gun at the entire crowd as they wrestled on the ground. I mean, that's rule number 1. You don't point the gun at really anyone.
Right.
And it never should have been out in the first place, Dave. I hope they catch her, and I hope she does time.
We're being overrun by Mexicans. It's a common refrain from the anti-immigrant right in the United States. Of course, it's laced not only with xenophobia, but it also appears to be flatly untrue. This is what I mean. A study that was just recently published by the Pew Research Center says that more Mexicans are leaving the United States than coming into the United States. This is a reversal of a huge immigration trend. Why are so many Mexicans going back to Mexico? Well, it seems to be a combination of a desire to reunite with family, combined with a not particularly thrilling economic recovery in the United States, at least with regard to wages and in certain sectors. Pew Research Center found that slightly more than 1 million Mexicans and their families, including their American-born children, left the U.S. to go to Mexico from 2009 to 2014. During that same time, 870,000 Mexicans came into the U.S. This is a net outflow to Mexico of Mexicans of around 130,000 individuals. This runs completely counter, Lewis, to the narrative of this out-of-control border where it's just Mexicans coming in and leeching off of services and taking all of our jobs. Actually, the 5-year period from 2009 to 14 saw an outflow of nearly 150,000 Mexicans. Not really the story we're getting from the Republicans, is it?
And a lot of Republicans aren't aware that many of the people coming over the border, it's not all just Mexicans, right? I mean, you have people from Central America, South America, but as far as many GOPers are concerned, anything south of Texas is just Mexico.
That's right. So we don't want to get confused also because of the if it's south of the U.S., it's Mexico mentality. You might be confused. We are still seeing an increase in the number, in the percentage of the U.S. population that is Hispanic, right? As a percentage of the total U.S. population, the Hispanic population is increasing. This is happening as a result of population growth of Hispanics already in the U.S., childbearing, etc., and immigration from other Central and South American countries. But with regard to the specific Mexico talking points and hypotheses, it's just not true. And there's this broader misunderstanding, which is there's this talking point among the right, the so-called Patriot movement, that everyone wants to come and live in the United States. Well, many people do want to come and live in the United States, but most don't. There is actually a world survey from Gallup done just a few years ago, which shows that 150 million out of the world's then 7 billion people would like to move to the U.S. That's 2.14%. 2.14% of the world would like to come to the U.S. Now, 150 million people is still almost half the population of the United States. So in the aggregate, it is many, many people. But the idea that anyone given the chance would just love to come here, it's not true. And if you go to Europe, Lewis, and you talk to people, people love living in Europe. You might not think they do because you don't have the same type of American patriotism with the flag waving and the July 4th and the whole thing. But people really like where they live on much of this planet.
They do. Yeah, they're very happy, prosperous, great countries. The people that want to leave their countries, yes, perhaps they want to come to the U.S. I'm sure they'd be equally thrilled to go to any number of European countries.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think the polls are asking those questions, though.
Last thought on this. In addition to the fact that only 2.14% of the world population would like to move to the U.S., a study from just a few months ago tells us that 35% of U.S.-born and current citizens would consider leaving the U.S. to go to another country. In fact, more than half of those 18 to 34 in the U.S. right now would consider leaving the U.S. and living somewhere else altogether. So this is not nearly as cut and dry as the right would have you think, which is everyone wants to come to the U.S. and it's a flood from Mexico and nobody wants to leave. Inform yourself a little bit. This is a big planet.
Yeah, let me add to that I think it's really healthy to live somewhere else for a while, because I think it can. I have never done it. I just haven't had the chance or the opportunity. But it's good to learn about other countries, other parts of the world, put things in perspective.
It sounds very anti-American what you're saying, Lewis.
Dave, it's all about knowledge and learning and experience, and it's a good thing, I assure you.
Thank you. Is Lewis wrong about having knowledge and experiences being good? You can let him know on Twitter. He's on Twitter at Lewis Motamedy. I'm on Twitter at dpacman, and we are all together on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show. After the break, yesterday, I was almost in a very ugly altercation at a local post office, and it all has to do with patriotism. I'll tell you the story next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
If you've been watching this program or listening to it, you probably have no idea, because we never talk about it, that we have this thing called membership, where you can sign up, support the work we do, vote with your dollars. And today's new member of the day is James Pruitt Jr., as opposed to James Pruitt Sr. James Pruitt Jr. is today's new member of the day. James gets the world famous bonus show, the commercial-free podcast feed, the commercial-free TV show, invitations to our quarterly town hall meetings with Lewis and with me. He signed up, well, more than likely, actually, I don't know, but I would assume he signed up at davidpakman.com/membership, and you can sign up there as well. You can also get your 2016 Hatriot Mail calendar, one of which I have right here, at davidpakman.com/calendar16. Let me now get into, Lewis, this situation with the Hatriot Mail calendars. As people may know, at davidpakman.com/calendar16, we are offering the Hatriot Mail calendar. It has 13 member-created images that relate to Hatriot Mail in some way, shape, or form. We've compiled them into a 2016 calendar that you can put up in your home, at your office, in your cubicle, in your corner office as the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I know we have many of them who regularly listen to this program. We, of course, things don't just happen. As people order the calendars, we have to ship out the calendars. And yesterday I had a batch of 30 calendars to ship out. Now that we're in Boston, I looked up, Lewis, what the most convenient post office is relative to the studio. I showed up there and I was ready to go. Now, in Western Massachusetts, when I would go to the post office to ship out calendars, it really was a very simple process. Even in New York City, busy New York City, I would show up at the post office. They have the postal measuring scale. They have the automated postal center where I can print postage and the whole thing, and it's very, very quick. Sadly, at the post office I went to yesterday in the Boston area, there was no automated postal center. So I said, okay, no problem. I will get in line and I will mail out these Hatriot Mail calendars. It was a very long line. I make it to the front of the line, and it is time to start mailing out the calendars. And I put the stack up there, and the guy who is behind what seems to be bulletproof glass in the post office that I went to has me pass the calendars to him through a two-way sort of container that is underneath the desk, and he gets the calendars, and he starts very, very slowly taking each calendar and putting it on his desk and punching in the zip code it's going to, and punching in that I want to send it one particular way or another particular way, printing out the postage and putting it on the calendar. And the entire process for each calendar was taking about 60 to 90 seconds. Now, of course, it's starting to be the holiday time. People are there. People are shipping stuff out. There's only 2 people working at the post office because they're permanently understaffed. So the line builds, and there's 4 people in line, and then there's 8 people in line, and then there's 15 people in line, and then the line is literally stretching outside of the post office. I can hear people grumbling. They're talking about, what is this guy doing? There's a whole stack of them. That's a quote I could hear behind me. There's a whole stack of them. And then all of a sudden I turn, and I'm trying to act frustrated as well for people to realize, listen, if it were up to me, I would have been out of here in 2 minutes because I would have printed out the postage at the automated postal center and I'd be done here. And then people say, can't you do that somewhere else? And I say, I'm sorry, we're all in the same boat here. You know, there's 2 people working. Where should I go, right? I mean, I'm doing the same thing you're doing. Things started to escalate. People come over. They start to look at what I'm shipping out. And I actually had some open Hatriot Mail calendars because one person ordered 10 of them. And that box, I was sort of keeping that separate. And they looked and they see Hatriot Mail 2016 and they see a cover of the White House with people with cables attached to their heads. And it was just a very strange thing. And I did feel intimidated, Louis, because I know the frustration of someone who shows up with a bulk mail shipment, and there's no bulk mail acceptance unit or an automated postal center. I get it. But our viewers need their Hatriot Mail calendars.
It's a paramount that people get their calendars. What are you going to do? I mean, it's victim of circumstance here, and this is not Dave. We need to make more cuts to the postal service, though, right? Because it costs
I know it's
too much
insane.
money.
People think we need to shrink the postal service. They're like, no, let's make them stop pre-funding their retirement account 75 years into the future, so they can have 5 people working at the counter instead of 2.
Yeah, unfortunate, and I know why people get frustrated, but being frustrated and yelling does not make the situation go any faster.
No, it doesn't. In fact, it probably slowed it down because of the commotion that it caused.
Exactly. So that's Dave, I'm sorry you had to deal with that, but don't let that dissuade you from ordering Hatriot Mail calendars, please.
No, these calendars are going out, and I have like 20 more that need to go out today. I think what I'm going to do is just take them with me back to Western Massachusetts, where the post office is a little more calm, and I can just go in there and handle it where the staff knows me. And that's, I think, going to be the plan.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Make it easy on yourself.
Let's talk a little bit about Thanksgiving, which is coming up. How do you deal with your right-wing family or relatives or your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving? Ryan wrote to me saying, hey, David, can you provide some retorts or tips for the ill-informed in-laws or relatives that we're bound to encounter over the Thanksgiving holiday? Suggestions might be why we should have free college tuition or why Ben Carson and Donald Trump would be bad presidents. I'm going to issue some general tips here because I actually have had to deal with this quite a bit. Do not argue over points of fact. I think this is one of the key things. Sometimes you'll start hearing crazy stuff said like, oh, you know, the earth is 6,000 years old, or Donald Trump is, I don't even know. You'll just hear arguments about points of fact. Abstinence-only sex education reduces the number of abortions people get. My focus when it's a family conversation, instead of starting to play point counterpoint with points of fact, would be to appeal to the empathetic family connection. Try to say, listen, well, I don't know how much you want to say, but maybe you have a personal story where you can say, my current fiance, had abstinence-only sex education, and she had no idea how pregnancy and birth control actually worked, and she got pregnant, and she needed an abortion. You obviously are empathetic towards my fiance, right? I don't know. I think it as a general thing, the arguments around points of fact at the Thanksgiving dinner table, I don't think are the way to go. I think, keep it about family, keep it about people.
Yeah, ask how the stuffing was made, or just be silent altogether. I mean, I guess if someone asks you a political question,
Right.
or says, Dave, what's your take on this?
Sure.
Then it's rude to stay silent. But
It is. But I would pick my battles, right? Because sure, if you're asked, hey, just out of curiosity, like, what's your view on abortion? Which is not really light Thanksgiving conversation, right? For it to come up like that. I could see it more coming up as, oh, these turkeys cost twice as much because of Obama and the jobs and blah, 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 blah. I would say, oh, what do you know? I'm curious. What do you know about job creation under President Obama? Oh, he's killed jobs. Really? Oh, where did you get that information? Like, did you get it from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or where did you get it? Asking questions in this way, I think, is a better approach, right, than starting to accuse people of stuff.
Yeah, because you can they can make themselves look foolish, I guess, if with a certain line of questioning.
Yeah.
But they might still get angry with you. I think really it's every situation is a little different. Some family members might be more hostile and aggressive than others.
Yeah.
But people start drinking, Dave. There's
Oh,
wine.
it can get crazy.
Yeah, things.
I would also suggest triangulate, though. As Lewis said, different people might have different views there. Try to find whoever is your closest ally politically and work with them, even if it's only on some base point of agreement, right? Try to get some yes out of someone else at the table that they're on your side, and triangulate and work together against the crazy uncle or the outrageous in-law or whoever it is.
Or make a phone call, tell everyone you've come down with an illness, and play Fallout 4 and watch Netflix all night.
You can always just pretend to fall down, and you've got to go home because you fell, and that's it.
Just fall down. Just show up, pretend to trip over something, bang your knee, and say, I've got to go.
Republicans claim to be about the rule of law, but only when it's convenient. For example, 34 governors, mostly Republicans, said that they would not allow refugees that are in the U.S. legally to enter their states. Now, that's against the law. It's been against the law for 35 years, since the Immigration Reform Act, I believe it's called, of 1980. Just a few days ago, at the Presidential Family Forum in Iowa, which was hosted by the conservative group, the Family Leader, Mike Huckabee pledged to ignore the court, meaning the Supreme Court, and that we should, quote, defy the court. If he were president, that's what he would do, by recriminalizing abortion and, of course, gay marriage through executive fiats. He also reiterated his plan to outlaw abortion with a presidential decree. You'll notice during this clip that Mike Huckabee appears to have absolutely no connection whatsoever to the real world, and that will become apparent when you listen to the words he is saying, but also when you pay attention to how he is saying them. He really seems to be living on another planet. Let's take a listen to Huck.
Should be done. Ignore the court. Defy the court, because it is the constitutional, not right, the constitutional responsibility of the president to not allow that judicial branch to overreach. And as far as we've often, for many of us, we've fought the life issue since the 70s. For 42 years, we've been on the defense. And the fact is, it's time for us to quit being on the defense. The next president should say, not we have to pass a constitutional amendment, because we don't. We simply accept the Constitution as we currently have it. And we invoke the Fifth Amendment, which guarantees due process before you can deprive any person of life or liberty, and the 14th that guarantees equal protection under the law. And we simply say there will be no abortion because that unborn child is a person. And if it is not a person, it is entitled to no due process. I finish with this.
Please finish.
If that sounds radical to you, if that sounds bold to you, so be it. But it is radical that we have eliminated 60 million unborn children in this country, and we have pretended that there's nothing we can do about it. The truth is, we can stand up not for a constitution we want to rewrite.
Okay, imagine for a second that those alleged 60 million kids were born, and then they become of reproductive age, and then they start having children. Imagine the multiplier effect on the growth of our population. And who will provide for those kids, or the kids of those kids? Who will provide the jobs? Who will provide for the medical expenses? Who will provide the food, the living space? Not Republicans, Lewis, because as we know, they claim to be pro-life when it comes to unborn fetuses. And then all of a sudden, it's no benefits, it's no social welfare programs, it's no free preschool, it's none of it.
That's 60 million children that would be deprived of Sesame Street if the Republicans had their way.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, but we think about it differently. To them, there's, it's this weird mix of science and religion. It's like, is it a person? Is it not a person? Does it have a soul? Does it not have a soul? And somehow the two get mixed up here, and it creates this incredibly polarizing topic.
And an important piece of what they say to debunk is they keep saying the Supreme Court cannot make law. That's correct, and the Supreme Court hasn't made a law. Laws are made, and then they are appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, which decides, does this law fit into the rules of laws that we have? When the Supreme Court makes a decision, they are not making law. They are saying whether the law that was made elsewhere conforms to the standards that exist in the United States. Let's take a break. Great interview coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by attorney Leo Thomas, who is a criminal defense attorney practicing in the state of Florida. Leo, it's so great to talk to you. It's become very popular over the last few years for people to make claims about what one's rights are with regard to police interactions. And it's, I think, a great opportunity to talk to someone like you who actually knows the law about this. So let's start at the very beginning. What are your rights with regard to speaking to police? In what situations, when you're approached to police, must you speak with them?
Okay, there are 3 or 4 different types of encounters, police encounters. For example, on the street, they pick you up, they want to talk to you, they go to your home, they stop you in a car or something, and so what has to be remembered is that the cardinal rule is that you never answer questions under those circumstances to a law enforcement officer without first contacting a lawyer. Now, I say this, and this applies to the innocent people as well as the possibly guilty ones. But bear in mind that incidents happen. Many people remember the Central Park jogging attack several years ago.
Right.
Where 4 African Americans and 1 Hispanic were convicted and put in jail and stayed in jail for 12, 13 years till they found out they didn't do it. So we have to be careful about that.
So let me ask a couple specific scenarios. If you're just walking on the street outside and you're approached by police, do you have to provide ID? Do you have to provide any information beyond that?
Okay, here's what you do. You're on the street and you're stopped by a police officer who wants to talk to you. Now, he can ask you for identification. That's all. If he wants to talk to you and ask you questions, he can say to you, would you come down to the headquarters? I'd like to talk to you for a while. You just say no if you don't want to, and you walk away. If you do agree to go, then you can leave at any time while you're down there. Now, if the officer refuses to allow you to leave, then of course your Miranda warnings must be given because you're in custody when he doesn't let you go. And so they're going to tell you, you're going to say, I'll take the first 2. I'll remain silent and I'll wait for an attorney. So
and Leo, in these cases, when you Is this why it is key to ask whether you are being detained? And that's something that sometimes people aren't aware they can ask at any time, because it sounds like what you're saying is if you are indeed being detained, then you must be Mirandized. And if you have not been Mirandized, it's logical to assume, or at least you should ask, whether you are free to leave at any time.
Well, that's correct. But by the way you're being asked, if you turn around and say, well, sorry, I can't go, I have to go down to an appointment, and you just walk away and then see what he does. If he takes you into custody, you must get your Miranda warnings. Now, there's another rule called the Terry law, which allows an officer to pat you down for a weapon if there are reasonable suspicions that you may have a weapon. That's kind of an aside issue. It does not involve Miranda. But once you're in custody and that's refused to let you leave, you must be given your Miranda warnings. And you must also remember that police officers lawfully can lie to the person to get them to help confess to something. So while they can lie, you cannot lie. The individual cannot lie, because that would be a crime and it would be used against you if you're in trial as a result of the stop and what happens there.
Fair enough. Now, what about the very specific scenario of these DUI checkpoints, as they're called, where you may be just freely traveling down a road and you see a lineup of cars, police are sort of slowing everybody down, and often one of the first questions that's asked as you come up to this police checkpoint is, have you been drinking tonight, or where are you headed tonight? What are one's rights in those scenarios?
Okay, under the circumstances such as that, first of all, these checkpoints may be legal in some states if they're given advance warning of them and it's projected that they're going to do it. Now, to answer the question, you do not have to say anything, because one of the first things the officer will look for is, are you slurring your speech, and so on. So when he asks for your identification, you give him the documents, driver's license, the insurance, the registration, you give it to him. You do not have to take a physical test. You can refuse it, with a nose, finger to nose and all that.
Sure.
You can refuse to take a blood alcohol. However, in most states, there's going to be some penalty for refusing. For example, in Florida, with 6 months, your license would be suspended.
Sure.
If you don't take it. Okay? But that's about all. Do not do anything that would incriminate yourself.
Now, as a sort of legal practice, that makes perfect sense. In the practical sense, I think we can all imagine how if you pull up to one of these and a police officer says, hey, where are you headed tonight? And you just say nothing and remain mute as if you can't speak, this can cause conflict with the police officer. And I'm curious how you would suggest people navigate that, because even if one is within their sort of legal rights to remain silent in that scenario, it can very quickly become adversarial, can it not?
That's true. But it has to get to a point where there's a crime committed before they can take the person in custody. Now, it depends on, for example, do you have to stay there on that line until you talk? I mean, are they going to force you to do that? It all depends on the rules of the particular stop area. But you should avoid anything that would give them any reason to find evidence against you based on what you say or what you may do. But at no time should you lie to a police officer.
Okay, and along those lines of not lying, let's say you are a good U.S. citizen and you understand your rights, but you don't want to be, you want to be helping police if you can, and police come to you and they say, hey, listen, we're aware of this crime that has been committed, who knows where, 2 towns over, and we're not saying you're a suspect. We just want to get some information from you about what you did that night. And you as a reasonable person say, oh, I wasn't in that town. Clearly, I am not being suspected of involvement here. I will speak to the police. I will help them because maybe I could help find a bad guy or something like that. Are there risks even to talking to police in that scenario where you really believe you have nothing to do with the investigation?
Yeah, because before I make that offer, which is fine, I would say, look, I'd love to help you. Let me call my attorney. He'll come over and we'll talk when he's here. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the attorney is going to sit down and talk to the client, and he's going to find out the facts, and then he's going to advise the client. Either you tell them truthfully, you don't lie, and you can help yourself, and so on. So, I mean, the attorney's there to help the situation. But many people are convicted, and many were on death row for the past 20, 30 years. They've exonerated 20 or 30 death row inmates. So people make mistakes, and you have to have the attorney's advice, whether you're innocent or guilty. You must get an attorney there because you're dealing with a police officer who has much more knowledge and has much more ability to obtain statements. And sometimes you make a mistake and you say you were somewhere where you weren't at a certain hour. So that's the rule. That's the first rule, a cardinal rule. Before you speak to a law enforcement officer, contact an attorney.
And then last thing, if you are in the position of wanting the help of police, in other words, you have been the victim of a crime or something has happened to someone you know, a child, etc. In those scenarios, do you think it is okay to merely call the police and have someone come to your residence and speak to them? Or even when reporting a crime, should someone consider having a defense attorney with them?
No, that's a situation such as that where it's absolutely clear with an ad asking you, were you in the other town that night? I mean, that's going a little bit further than they should.
Yeah.
But where it's something like that at the house and you want to get someone over there, I don't think there's a need for that.
All right, I think most people would agree with that. Leo Thomas, criminal defense attorney who practices in Florida. Really great to have you on. Thank you so much for talking to us.
No, thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
There's a new study that claims to dispute the idea of a spectrum of sexual orientation. There's this long-standing theory of sexual orientation, which comes in great part from the findings of Alfred Kinsey in 1948, who suggested that people are sort of somewhere on a sexual orientation continuum or spectrum. People are either more towards the exclusively heterosexual side or more towards the exclusively homosexual side, or in the middle, where you are sort of 50-50, you are equally heterosexual and homosexual, meaning you are bisexual. Some of those findings by Kinsey have been questioned in the last 10 or 15 years, but there's now a new report by Washington State University researchers which says that there are specific differences that define who is heterosexual and who is not. This study looked at the behavior of 33,000 American adults. They found 3% of men and 2.7% of women were not heterosexual. And that's a very key wording here. Alyssa Norris, who's one of the researchers who was involved in the study, said there are distinct quantitative differences in sexual orientation, which means that there are categories of people based on sexual orientation. By actually getting some understanding of how to categorize people and the unique challenges they face, we're getting a lot more insight into their well-being and experiences. This actually tells us nothing about whether there is something let me put it a different way. The study doesn't say that you are either gay or straight. What the study says is you are either heterosexual or not. And under not heterosexual, there can be all sorts of things. So a lot of the headlines as a result of this study are saying there's no such thing as bisexuality. That's not what this study says. You can have the debate about bisexuality. All this study says is there are differences between those who are heterosexual and those who are not. And not being heterosexual is not one thing, I believe, is the key takeaway here.
Yeah. So I guess it's an interesting study, but studies like this on any topic, really, you're always running into problems with headlines and different sites and people reporting on it will make headlines that they think are catchy. Some people only read headlines, and then you've got people spreading misinformation around. Not
to mention that we have in science a lack of being able to replicate a ton of the studies that have been done, and that's increasingly something that the science community is discussing when it comes to many different issues, and we'll talk about that more. Let's talk about world hunger. World hunger is a social construction. Now, you might say, well, what do you mean? How is it a social construction? I don't mean it's a social construction in the sense that world hunger doesn't really exist except in the minds of society. What I mean is society and culture have created world hunger as a problem, or certainly not solved it. And I've discussed this many times. Hunger is not an issue of production. It's an issue of distribution. Lewis has told us stories from his time working at a grocery store about the amount of wasted food. I recently asked a friend who owns a restaurant who says he does the best he can to prevent wasting food. I asked him about it, and he said it is hard sometimes to gauge exactly how much you need, and you can't really just give the food or get the leftovers into the right hands. It's complicated logistically. It's complicated legally as well. And there's a new article in the New Statesman by John Gray, which confirms exactly what we've been saying for a long time and actually takes it a step further. Aside from the sort of social and cultural issues that exist with regard to hunger, he points out in brilliant detail that most famines historically have been the result of exercises of power, of politics, of war. And this includes the Great Irish Famine of the 1800s, the Great Bengal Famine around the time of World War II, the Soviet famine under Lenin in the early 1920s, which happened during a civil war, the famine in Greece in the 40s. Lewis, you've talked about just generally in World War I and World War II, the number of people that died not from actual war injuries, but just from not having enough food. And this also stretched to some of the surrounding areas that were war-torn. And the killer line here in this New Statesman piece is, those who look to technology for a quick fix to hunger assume that the global food crisis is fundamentally a problem of supply. In reality, it is largely a problem of distribution. Once we have the political will and stability that is required, we can solve world hunger very, very quickly.
We can, but we have to want to solve world hunger.
Right.
And so technology is going to help, right?
But technology can help given the right conditions.
Can help.
Yeah.
Yeah. But certainly right now, I mean, think about how much food is going to animals that people will then consume.
Sure.
It doesn't really even out. There's way more food being fed to the animals. And
right.
if that food were evenly distributed, it's a staggering amount of food.
And people will say, oh, yeah, but a lot of that corn being used to feed animals is not really corn that is fit for human consumption. Right. There's no rule that you have to grow that corn everywhere that it is being grown. People will say, yeah, you can't really grow anything else there. All we can get is this low-grade corn, which then we use to feed animals. That's just not true.
And, I think where corn can grow, other things can grow as well. It doesn't have to be corn.
Absolutely. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I received. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David. Hey, my name is Pat, and I'm a proud owner of a 2015 David Pac-Man calendar that my girlfriend got me.
Yep.
And I really, really love it. I love your show. But one problem I have is that you have Columbus Day on there. I think it should be taken off, maybe renamed Native Americans Day. And That's all I'm calling about. I just don't agree you should have Columbus Day on there. So anyway.
Fair enough. Okay. On the 2016 calendar, which I have here, which you can get anytime, it does have Columbus Day on it. For the 2017 calendar, Louis, I am open to putting it to a vote for the audience. Should our 2017 calendar contain Columbus Day or not? We'll set up a vote next year when we're thinking about it.
That's fine. You could put both names, maybe one in parentheses under the other.
Sure.
But it still is recognized nationally as a holiday, and that's the name. So,
it's a federal holiday, so it's relevant for people to know that that's the day. We'll talk about it next year, and it is on the 2016 calendar. On the bonus show, police racial profiling in Texas, Ahmed the clockmaker seeks damages in a new lawsuit, and Canada changes their refugee policy. DavidPakman.com/membership. Get the bonus show instantly. And of course, DavidPakman.com/calendar16. Get the calendar for free with your membership.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.